So I'm using Barbara Jones' slides, and I have cut them down to make it a bit shorter, but there is the full presentation on your Google Drive folder. So you can see her whole presentation that she did for us last year in May. And what she did, she spoke about a research project that they had done at UWC to map flexible learning provision and to kind of develop some sort of framework that lets us allow to think or to analyze our own provision through a flexible learning framework. So Barbara Jones works with Shirley Waters at the Division for Lifelong Learning at UWC. And their starting point of starting to think about flexible learning is, if you might know that a couple of years ago there was a new white paper published by the Department of Higher Education and Training on post-school education and training. And what that white paper did is to allow campus residential institutions to offer distance education. So for the first time, not only UNISA and established distance education institutions were allowed to offer distance education programs, but institutions such as UWC and CPUT were given the permission to think about offering distance education. So that white paper, what it does, it promotes learner-centeredness, it promotes lifelong learning, it has a big push for more flexible learning provision, and that includes a lot of things. That includes more flexible access to higher education, such as RPL, but it also talks about flexible learning delivery, flexible learning content, and also flexible learning support. So it's much broader than just access. And it talks about a lot of different things. So in that white paper, they advocate for programs or provisions that would be responsive to our students' needs. And we all know that our students have changed, that have very different challenges to the students, say, 10, 20 years ago. But they say we need programs, we need degrees that take into account the varying life and work contexts of our students, rather than requiring to attend daily classes at fixed times and central venues. So rather than a one model fits all approach, they're saying think about how you could offer something that would speak directly to the needs of our students. And it also, for the first time, the white paper speaks about educational technologies and the importance that they might have in offering these more flexible learning programs. And it talks about online and blended learning, and it encourages institutions to think more about these kind of offerings in open and distance education. So this is now, that was a crucial point. It was given, it gave the permission to institutions like CPUT to think about offering distance education. And that's why then people like Yolanda and now Sarita and there are other programs at the institution are thinking of offering this kind of programs, which comes with a whole range of issues that they're going to talk about. So then Barbara went on to discuss the kind of paradoxes that we find ourselves in. And she spoke about the UWC context, but I think we can take that one-to-one into our own context as well. She talks about how we have a pressure to widen access to take more and more students in. You all know that. But at the same time, we all know that our students are all working. You know, they don't have the luxury and the freedom anymore to study full time and to be on campus at any time. So we know that we have students' needs that are changing, but we are still offering the same kind of provision of courses. And what's also happening is that the demand for our part-time evening degrees is decreasing, while at the same time we know that there is this huge need for more flexible working. So something in the way we offer part-time or we think about part-time flexible course offerings is not working at the moment. So we have space issues, we have all these paradoxes that we live in that call for new models of teaching and learning, but we are not yet really thinking deeply enough about it. So what she then spoke about is how we need to start looking at our students not just as students who come to the university to study, but that there are complex subjects that have multiple identities. So they're not just learners, but at the same time, they do work. Most of our students work, either paid or unpaid, during the day, in the evening, during the weekends. And they also have a role to play in the home and the community, which we need to acknowledge in our course offerings. So the research that they conducted, their key questions were, how or is it possible to develop a new paradigm that would move beyond the binary of either offering a full-time program on campus or a part-time program in the evenings? Is there something that we can offer that would address and speak to our students' needs in a better way? And which would include all the diverse students that we have and that inhabit our institutional space. And what are the conditions if there is such a model? Yeah, if we found such a model that would speak to the needs of our students a little bit more beyond the kind of binaries that we find each other's in, what kind of condition, what kind of framework, what are the things that we need to have in place in terms of policies, systems that would allow that more flexible delivery? And in their research, so they went out and mapped a variety of more flexible learning practices at UWC. So they went into different departments who offered different courses or who had started thinking about offering more flexible, whether that was an online course or whether it was a module-based course or whether it was a block release offering. So they went into these departments and they mapped the current flexible offerings and practices. And what they came up with is that what at the moment currently at UWC, what they found is that flexible learning and teaching provision is an inclusive, student-centered approach that promotes flexibility across various levels. So there's flexibility in admission, there must be flexibility in curriculum design, there must be delivery in teaching in the way you teach and the way you assess, and there also must be the appropriate flexible support systems. So you can't offer an online course if you don't have people who know what online facilitation means. You know, if you offer an online program, you have to start thinking about how are you going to support the students online. You know, so it's a complex thing and it has a lot of things you have to think about. And it's not just about creating content and putting it out there. It's about managing expectations. Sarita, I'm sure will talk about that. It's about letting students know what they're getting themselves into if they register part-time on a real estate course rather than full-time. What is it that they need to have in place? What are the requirements? What is the time they have to? What is it that they have to negotiate with their employers if they do this kind of teaching? So there's a range of things that you have to keep considering if you want to go that route. So if you want to understand flexible learning and teaching, you have to think of it as an ecology. And I think this is where both Sarita and Yolanda talk about this idea that they can do as much as they can be super prepared and they can use the technology really well and they can think about content. If the institutional culture does not support a flexible registration, for example, if the way courses are being registered is not flexible enough to accommodate, and again Sarita will talk about these things, you can't do this if the ecology is not right. So there's a lot of stuff, and the thing is it comes up in these pilots, the stuff that both Yolanda and Sarita are fighting against is not so much technology, it's not so much the students, it's not so much the stuff, it's the institutional culture that is not flexible enough. So if you want to do this well, we need to work holistically within an ecological and in a framework that looks at all things that need to be in place. So that affects learning, that affects the technology, but that also affects institutional culture to see whether we are ready to do this. And it's a big juggle because on one hand side, you want to be as flexible as possible. You want to give people the flexibility to submit assignments, to do online exams, to study at their own pace, in their own time. But at the same time, you have structural issues about course plans and completion dates, and the way you want people to socially interact as well. You know, this idea, do you want synchronicity or should everything be asynchronous? You know, so there's always this juggle when you think about flexibility between how flexible can you be, but where are the limits or the boundaries in which you have to negotiate your flexibility. So the universities are a very complex system, and if we are thinking of revolutionary, because really what they are doing, both Yolanda and Sarita, is revolutionary. It's new, it's pioneering something that has not been done before. So if we want to do this more, and there's a lot of push for more offerings of flexible and part-time and distance programs across all departments and faculties, we need to think about really how do we shift, all of us, in quite dramatic ways. How do we shift the teachers? How do we shift the students? How do we shift delivery? But also how do we shift admin and the institution itself to allow for this flexibility to happen? So it is the condition, it is the actual system that needs to change if we want to do that. And we need to be very, very aware of this if we want to offer more flexible learning provision.